Welcome to a new episode of the Opening School. The 75th Tata Steel chess tournament ended on the 27th of January, and what a tournament Magnus Carlsen had. In the end, he'd won 10 points out of 13 and finished a point and a half ahead of runner-up Aronian. So obviously we're going to take a look at one of Carlsen's games from the Tata Steel chess tournament.
The game we have in mind for this episode was played in the 12th round between Carlsen as white and the American Super Grandmaster Hikaru Nakamura as black. As often is the case when Nakamura plays, the opening often strays from the comma.
I think we all remember the time Nakamura played queen to h5 as his second move in the Siegerman chess tournament in 2005 against Grandmaster Sasikirian.
Well, this game wasn't quite as crazy and Nakamura actually didn't deviate right off the bat. Instead, the game started off fairly normal with e4, c5, knight to f3, knight to c6, d4, c takes on d4, knight takes on d4, and e5. Nakamura has chosen the Kalashnikov variation and it's one of the most common choices, but it isn't rare either.
The opening opens up a lot of black squares on the queen's side, and that is something white targets directly by playing knight to b5.
Both the d6 square and the c7 square is under attack. It's good to know that black is actually able to play a6 without losing. White should play the obvious knight to d6 check, to which black simply captures the knight with the bishop. To play king to e7 instead is unfortunately not brilliant and leaves black in a lost position after bishop to e3, queen to c7, bishop to c5, king to d8, knight takes on f7 check, and king to e8.
The fact is that it's actually better for white to capture an f8 with the bishop than to capture the rook. That's quite interesting. Even though the capture on h8 leads to a bigger material advantage, the capture on f8 leads to a better position, although more complex. Let's return to before king to e7 and take a look at what happens after bishop takes on d6. Alfred, how do you continue from here?
Well, of course, white has to begin by recapturing on d6. And this is most commonly followed by queen to h6, f6, where black tries to exchange queens. White doesn't want it since it would only lead to black being able to develop his knight, leaving us in a position where black actually has the developmental advantage as compensation for the weaker pawn structure.
Normally, white decides to retreat with the queen to d1, after which queen to g6 and knight to c3 is played. But let's go back to the actual game. In it, Nakamura decided to keep Carlsen out of the d6 square by occupying it with pawn to d6. Usually, white plays c4 or knight 1 to c3 in an attempt to solidify the center. Carlsen, however, decided to play g3 instead. The plan is simple, to fianchet the bishop and put pressure on the d5 square. But it's also slow, and the bishop isn't really at its best square.
From this position, the game started to get quite aggressive and strange to say the least. Nakamura began by putting pressure on the white king side by playing h5, and this was followed by knight 1 to c3, threatening knight to d5 with a fork on c7. Black stopped the threat from realizing by playing a6, after which knight to a3, b5, knight to d5, and knight g to e7 was played. Black ends open on both sides, creating weaknesses, which mean that black has to play aggressively in order not to fall apart completely. So what happened next?
Well, black played the game continued with bishop to g2, bishop to g4, f3, bishop to e6, c3, h4, knight to c2, and an exchange on d5. Black has managed to crack the previously calm facade, but from this point on, the game will spin out of control.
Well, first of all, black has to move the threatened knight, and there aren't that many more options than knight to a5, after which Carlsen went to the attack with the move f4, which was followed by knight to f5, g4, h3, bishop to e4, knight to h4, and castle kingside.
This is certainly something else. If you have nerves of steel and a brain that can calculate like a computer, you might be able to actually like these kind of openings. The player that can calculate a move ahead of his opponent will be the one with the clear advantage. To castle kingside in such a position is not what I recommend if you don't have the guts and brains to back it up. The game only gets better from this point, so I really do recommend that you take a look at it at your earliest convenience. But that's all for now. Bye!